you. Has life been passing you by? Want to add a little explosiveness to your day? Or find out if you have what it takes to beat a demon-possessed machine that magically harvests souls for fuel? 10 teams, 3 worlds, burn rubber for racing fame. Then join the Girapur Grand Prix, and this could be you. Not him. Her. Take a chance for fantastic glory and incredible riches. Like the Aether Spark, this year's legendary prize. It's worth the risk, we promise. So put down that remote and push your pedal past its limits. We want you to be a part of the Girapur Grand Prix. Frankly, because we're running out of racers. But hey, it'll be a ton of fun! It's only a death race if you die.
But before we get into all that, let's not forget that Ether Drift is a story of speed and competition, sometimes with violent consequences, and of course, it's also a love story. But perhaps most importantly, it's a great little reminder that you need to race right over to my Twitch affiliate channel and subscribe right away, because not only do I stream over there 3 or more times a week on average, there is a 2-week video on demand archive for you, all absolutely free. Link in the description. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Hey guys, as we get started with this budget perspective, let me get you to lean in real close. I got a secret for you. It turns out higher rarity cards are good. Okay, I admit that's not much of a secret. And that's exactly why I'm not going to spend our time talking about all the good rares and mythics. There are plenty of other content creators willing to do that. And since I know that a budget player following our plan is only about 70% likely to have any given rare and only about 50% likely to have any given mythic, with the actual playset statistics going even further down than that very rapidly, I'm just not going to spend our time that way. Instead, I'm gonna turn our magnifying glass towards those commons and uncommons, because, you know, those are cards you're gonna have, and I want you to be able to get the most bang for your buck. Alright, so now that we've set the tone that we're really not going to spend time talking about those higher rarity cards, it really puts a spotlight on just how important I think these next couple cards are, because there are a couple here that I think really take the trophy. The first of which, of course, is the literal trophy of the set, the 4-mana Aether Spark. Get this, legendary artifact Planeswalker equipment at Mythic. Yep, you heard me right. It starts with 4 loyalty, and it has a static ability that anytime it is equipped to a creature, it cannot be attacked as a planeswalker. Its +1 ability allows it to do just that, to equip to a creature, and you put a +1/+1 counter on that creature in addition to the Aether Spark itself. It has a -5 ability that allows you to draw 2 cards, and don't forget, it starts with 4, and has a +1 ability that you're going to want to use right away. So drawing cards on this seems really, really easy. You also have a -10 ability where you add 10 mana of any one color. Frankly, that feels a little bit like a win more. Oh, and speaking of a win more with the Aether Spark, let's not forget its static ability also says that anytime it deals combat damage during your turn, put that many loyalty counters on the Aether Spark. Overall, I think this card has a ton of potential, and for budget players, potentially having one of these in your collection can go in any deck and make any decent creature that much better, and create a draw engine to boot. And of course, that's not all. Several times during the Foundation season, I talked at length about the Adaptive Automation, a 3-mana 2/2 artifact construct that is kind of a generic lord for all of your tribal decks. Not only does it join the tribe itself, but it gives other creatures of the tribal type +1/+1. And in fact, I recommend this as a day one craft for new players starting out in Foundations. But of course, Ether Drift has a brand new tribal toy. This is the 3-mana Lifecraft Engine artifact vehicle. And just like Adaptive Automation, when it comes into play, you select a creature type. Vehicles you control are the chosen type in addition to their other types, and each creature you control of the chosen type other than this vehicle get +1/+1. It has a crew cost of 3. Now, while I would not recommend rushing out on day one and crafting these 2 cards from Ether Drift, I do think that by the end of the season, we're going to know whether these cards are really having impact, and assuming that they should be worth a wildcard consideration. But of course, even the most free-to-play account is going to open dozens of Ether Drift packs for absolutely free, so there's a good shot that you're going to pick these up during the course of the season without using any wildcards at all. Now, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, Ether Drift has a few higher-end cards that I refer to lovingly as black holes, or cards that you will eventually regret having spent wildcards on. First and foremost, this set finishes the Verge cycle. And hey, I'm not saying these cards aren't good and aren't worth being in your collection, but the fact of the matter is, even the most free-to-play player can just about bank on getting 1 or 2 of these out of their free packs. And with so many rare dual lands being available in Standard, you're almost guaranteed to have what you need. Now, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, definitely check out my short video, Better Rare Lands, in which I break this down and make some recommendations to give you an even more versatile land package. About what reprints are coming to you in Ether Drift. And since we were just talking about rare lands, we might as well start with the common land cycle, the gain lands. Yep, that's right. Even though these were just printed in Foundations last season, we're getting them again. These things are never leaving Standard. You might as well get used to them. If somehow you don't have a set of these, keep in mind that the black-white gain lands are particularly good in today's Foundation-based Life Gain Matters deck. And of course, the green-white lands similarly go into eternal builds in that color pair. Once you get past those 10 common land reprints, there really aren't that many to talk about. In fact, just 3, those being Spell Pierce, Lightning Strike, and Broken Wings. I won't go so far as to say don't draft these, but certainly keep in mind anytime you select one of these reprint cards that's already in your collection, that means 1 less new card from Ether Drift being added in. I will be going over all the 10 2-color pairs presented in Ether Drift in a future draft video. But for now, I think there's one that we need to keep an eye on, and that is the green-white color pair that is all about mounts. You see, we have an existing pre-con mount deck given to us, and there is a lot of potential opportunity here to make that good deck even better.
Start your engines!
I have already discussed Ether Drift's mechanics in a short video that released on Sunday, but when it comes to start your engines, there was one thing in particular that I wanted to discuss, because I have seen a lot of content creators complaining that there's really no way to get to the max speed of 4 before turn 4 or maybe even 5, and well, it's just not true. You see, if you start off your turn 1 by playing one of those low rarity new lands that start your engines, like Avishkar Raceway, and then tap it for colorless mana to summon Gingerbrute, and subsequently attack with Gingerbrute's haste, you first off start your engines, you go to a speed of 1, then Gingerbrute damages your opponent, you go to a speed of 2. Then on your subsequent turns 2 and 3, Gingerbrute's activated pseudo-unblockable ability could potentially ensure that you hit max speed of 4 as early as turn 3. And hey, let's not forget, Gingerbrute still has almost a 2-year run in Standard remaining, so if you haven't already added this card to your collection, now may be the time to do so. Now that we got all of that out of the way, let's talk about some of these uncommons that are going to be punching above their weight. And I want to start with the colorless cards. And really the conversation revolves around Rover Blades, not because I think this card is exceptionally good, but it does have some very interesting play lines that people need to be aware of, particularly in the limited environment. Don't forget that when you equip this to a creature and that creature swings, that creature taps. Rover Blades as an equipment on that creature does not tap. That means that when you pass turn and your opponent swings back at you, you could theoretically crew Rover Blades. It'll stop being an equipment, basically falling off into the battlefield as a creature in its own right, and be available as a double strike 2/2 blocker. At the very least, don't get caught by this trick on your opponent's part, and if you're lucky, you might be able to catch them, particularly if you have a combat trick to back it up. There is one other group of cards that I want to talk about here that technically are not colorless, but should have been. The road cycle, there's one for each of the 5 colors, and they're all identical except for the color of mana. And really that's disappointing. They really had an opportunity to design this card to name the appropriate color that you wanted when it came into play, and that would have freed up 4 more uncommon slots for different, more creative design space. And as a budget player, it's always disappointing to see those opportunities missed. The colorless section ends up being a bit bigger than I had originally expected because they have made a day 0 Oracle update. Originally, it was 2 mana and tap pit automation. When you next activate an exhaust ability for this turn, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy, but they have added a clause reading that when you activate an exhaust ability that isn't a mana ability, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. So when we look at a card like Loot the Pathfinder, the blue exhaust ability and the red exhaust ability could be copied by the pit automation, but the green exhaust ability could not be copied because it produces mana. That all seems totally fair, right? And one last thought on colorless cards. I want to caution you against getting crafted into the Lotus hype. I'm not saying this card isn't good. I'm not saying no one will figure out how to make this card do amazing things in Standard, but this is not going to be one of those colorless staples that budget players lean on and use over and over again. Wait for it to prove itself, and then if you want to build that specific deck or decks, do so. But just be aware, in my mind, this is the living definition of a win more card, because if you're in a point to make this do something useful for you, why aren't you already winning the game? Before we move on to mono-colored cards, there are a couple of cycles that I feel like we need to talk about. First up, tutors are good, especially for us budget players when they come around at the uncommon rarity, because they allow us very often to tutor up more expensive cards like rares and mythics essentially giving us a second copy in our deck for just the wildcard cost of an uncommon. For instance, Trinket Mage lets us tutor up an artifact with a mana value of 4 or 5. Hour of Victory is probably the closest thing we have seen to Demonic Tutor in quite some time. Skipping over to the Guidelight Pathmaker, this little guy allows us to tutor up an artifact card. If it has a mana value of 2 or less, we can put it directly onto the battlefield. Otherwise, it goes into our hand. Don't worry, we'll be talking about most of the other multicolor signpost uncommons in the draft archetypes video. You may have also noticed the Fang Druid Summoner there allows you to tutor up a creature from your library or graveyard that has no abilities and put it into your hand. And that brings us to our second grouping. That's right, we've got a complete uncommon cycle of vanilla legendary creatures. And while I don't think these cards are going to have any business being in the command zone for you, they are particularly situationally relevant as they are very often undercosted bodies. This will be particularly true in your limited environments. Alright, so moving into white, let's start with Cloudspire Captain, a 3 mana 2/3 human pilot. He has a Lord ability, giving all of your mounts and vehicles +1/+1, and of course he does that pilot thing where he crews more efficiently. But the uncommon that really takes the cake in white is Glory Heath Lynx, a 2 mana 2/3, because this guy is bringing everything to the table. He's got 2 relevant creature types, whether you want to be building cats or mounts, and the lifelink ability makes it fit into those decks extremely well. And let's not forget that if you can manage to attack with this while saddled, which shouldn't be too terribly hard, you get to tutor up a Plains card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. What more could you want from an uncommon? Alright, so blue is another color that has a lot going on at the uncommon level. And first up, we've got Spike Shell Harrier, a 5 mana 4/4 artifact creature robot turtle. And there's no way you can tell me this is not a direct reference to Mario Kart. But anyway, when it ETBs, you get to return target creature or vehicle an opponent controls to its owner's hand. If that opponent's speed is greater than each other player's speed, reduce that opponent's speed by 1. This is essentially the only way to reduce speed within Ether Drift. It should also be noted that you cannot reduce the speed below 1. So it's very situational. The ability to bounce back things like vehicles can be situationally very beneficial. Unfortunately, the Harrier does not have flash, so it doesn't lean into that. But if you can time it correctly where your opponent has tapped a creature to either saddle or crew a vehicle, and then bounce the saddled mount or the crewed vehicle to their hand, they essentially lose that vehicle/mount as well as having tapped a creature. Hugely beneficial. If this had flash, it would probably be one of the best uncommons in the set. But it doesn't, so we'll move on. To the Scrounging Skyray. I recall many members of the community were a little disappointed in Foundation's mono blue draw 2 archetype, that it just really wasn't getting there as a budget deck, and I repeatedly mentioned that it was missing something. And the Skyray here, along with the cycling mechanic that's heavily present, particularly in blue and red, might be just what it's looking for. The cycling mechanic may also give a rebirth to a cycling deck in Eternal formats. We'll have to wait and see as the set develops and the individual formats respond. But I think the best blue uncommon head and shoulders has to be Diversion Unit, a 2 mana 2/1 with flying, and a sacrifice the creature, counter target instant or sorcery spell, unless its controller pays 3, your cost on that is a single blue mana. I say this is head and shoulders better because it really is. A 2 mana 2/1 with evasion is pretty good to start with. Having a counter spell on a stick is really, really good. And all of this comes at a huge irony for our little robot that does not appear to have either a head or shoulders. Blue also appears to have what I consider to be the only other real trap in this format, and that is blue presents multiple cards that have mill, or I should say milling your opponent, as a win condition. And sadly, as far as a constructed budget deck is concerned, I just don't think it gets there. I also don't think there's quite enough there to do this as a value draft archetype, unless you happen to get very lucky with multiple copies of a particular rare. But that's neither here nor there. I just would not get sucked in to a mill as a win con in this set. I think it's a losing proposition. As we move into black, of course, as a color, it's always going to have good low-level removal. But so what? That's sort of the expectation. And black for Ether Drift, particularly at the uncommon level, is not very deep. And this is an issue that is likely going to be reflected in both of its jump-in evaluations as well as draft archetype evaluations. Now, the most okayest uncommon for black is Carrion Cruiser, a 3 mana 3/2 vehicle, which, let's be honest, is not really the kind of stats you look for in a vehicle, even when it only has a crew cost of 1. However, what kind of pushes this into the I guess it's okay territory, might even be situationally good, is the fact that when it enters, you mill 2 cards and then return a creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to your hand. Of course, black is interested in putting things in the graveyard. This puts a reasonable body onto the board, if not good, as well as return one of those milled things back to your hand. Most interestingly, though, in black uncommons is the Risen Necrogent, a 5 mana 5/4 zombie cat knight. This little guy is basically going to be the poster child for Start Your Engines, because if that mechanic isn't good, this card is terrible. On the other hand, if Start Your Engines becomes a real threat and a defining factor in this limited environment in particular, or transitions into constructed play, and max speed is a reasonable thing you can get, its max speed ability of giving you a 2/2 black zombie creature token at the beginning of each of your end steps is going to make this card absolutely amazing. I know I'll be holding my breath to see which way this one goes, because really the coin has been tossed and it's in the air. At first glance, red is going to look an awful lot like black in this set, because after all, at low rarity, red is just a collection of removal. But then when you look a little bit deeper and stop and think about the format a bit, you realize that red's removal is a little different from black, because it is most often damage based and not just destroy effects. And some of that direct damage can be pointed at your opponent. And this set cares about speed, so incidental damage to your opponent, getting through a clogged up battlefield for instance, can have some deep impacts. When we take a closer look at something like Adrenaline Jockey, 3 mana 3/3 Minotaur Pilot, whenever a player casts a spell and it's not their turn, this creature deals 4 damage to them. That's going to increase speed here and there. Whenever you activate an exhaust ability, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So that makes this an exhaust payoff. Then we've got something like Grease Wrench Goblin that is an exhaust enabler. A 1 mana 2/1 Goblin Artificer with exhaust, 2 and a red, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. Put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. You'll also notice that this is enabling that discard draws matter deck that we talked about earlier in blue. Blue-red is the predominant pair for that potential archetype. So maybe cycling's going to be a thing. And hey, if cycling's going to be a thing, Marauding Mako, a 1-mana 1/1 Shark Pirate, is probably going to be part of it. Whenever you discard one or more cards, put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature. That could have been worded to limit it to once per turn, but they didn't. You can just go hog wild on this. The card itself also cycles for 2 colorless mana and plays alongside Sky Crash, a 2-mana instant destroy target artifact, which is essentially creature removal in this set. It also cycles for a single red mana. These are going to get together like peas and carrots. And I believe Red's best trick at Uncommon in this set, and possibly the best card at Uncommon in the entire set, is the 5-mana 5/4 Crew 2 vehicle with haste, known as the Spire Mech Cycle. The real trick to this is its exhaustibility, again, playing on that particular cue. To exhaust, you tap another untapped mount or vehicle you control. This vehicle, meaning the Mech Cycle, becomes an artifact creature. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each mount and or vehicle you control other than this vehicle. So yeah, this can be quite large very quickly, coming down with haste. This is a real finisher, particularly for the red-white deck. I know it seems silly to say this in a set so full of vehicles, but that is by and far the vehicle-list deck available. And then there was green, which honestly has more depth and complexity than you really expect from green, particularly at lower rarity. Like, take Autocark Mammoth here, a 6-mana 5/5 elephant creature mount. Saddles for 5. When it enters or when it attacks while saddled, create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. So not only are you getting 8 power and toughness on the board for 6 mana, but if you can saddle this with any regularity, which it goes a long way to saddling itself with that 3/3 elephant creature token, you can just continue to put power and toughness onto the board at a pretty remarkable rate. And let's not forget, pilots are a thing for both mounts and vehicles, and the green and green-white combinations are tending to put the +1/+1 counters here and there, making this even easier to accomplish. And now I'd like to take a moment to throw a little bit of love towards the Greenbelt Guardian, a 2-mana 2/2 elf ranger. I just don't think this guy's getting enough love. Not only are elves a significant creature type from Foundations, that I believe the best budget deck is the mono green version, where you just play a bunch of elves and then overrun. And guess what? This little guy for green mana gives a creature trample. You can do that at instant speed after they've decided how they're going to block, and it has an exhaust ability, which again you can activate at instant speed, that gives itself 3 +1/+1 counters for 3 and a green. Of course, you can only activate that once, unless you're able to activate it more than once. We'll talk about that in a bit. Very interesting things here. I think this gives a nice additional overrun effect to mono green elves that is also an elf in its own right and not a sorcery speed spell. Alright, so at several points in this video I have touched on the fact that the exhaust decks, the blue-green and green-red, have so much upside potential, and a lot of that has to do with the Elvish Refueler. Again, also an elf, 3-mana 2/3 druid. It has an exhaust ability of 1 and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, but the real trick to this is actually the first clause. As a static ability, during your turn, as long as you haven't activated an exhaust ability yet this turn, you may activate exhaust abilities as though they haven't already been activated. So yeah, here's your loophole. You can activate exhaust abilities more than once, under very specific conditions. And that is what is going to potentially break this deck wide open. And because this comes in as an uncommon, it's threatening to do it at a very budget-friendly level. Just in case that isn't tricksy enough for you, we need to talk about Fang Guardian, a 4-mana 4/2 ape druid with flash. When it enters, another target creature or vehicle you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Now, honestly, a 4-mana combat trick would not even make the conversation, but a 4-mana combat trick that also brings a 4/2 body down, it's pretty significant because you're adding 6 power, 4 toughness to the board, and the potential for an ambush block situation here is just tremendous. I mean, this guy is basically a blowout in a can. They think they're swinging into a pretty open field. You end up killing and removing 2 of their creatures and then potentially set up very nicely for the swing back situation. Green also has at least one combat trick at the uncommon level that I think is very worth talking about, especially for those mount decks. Target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible. This, of course, is Defend the Rider, a single green instant speed spell. That right there is honestly enough, but as an alternate case, you could create a 1/1 colorless pilot, which does the pilot thing for either mounts or vehicles. That's pretty darn strong. We know green-white is the mount deck, and I think at least a couple copies of this is going to end up in any final build for a budget version of that deck. And last up in green, I think we need to talk about Molt Tender, a card that is getting more than enough attention, but I think it's getting it for all the wrong reasons. This 1-mana 1/1 insect druid can tap, exile a card from your graveyard, and add 1 mana of any color. And people are losing their mind about this color fixing application. Some people are acting like this is the second coming of Birds of Paradise, which it clearly is not. But really, what's going on with this card here that's of actual interest is the way it interacts with the graveyard. You see, you can tap it to mill a card, or as we said, you can tap it to exile a card from the graveyard to create that mana. And it's that graveyard interaction that is the real value of this card. This is not necessarily in the set to enable color fixing and splashing and things like that, although in many cases it will. It's here to help you interact with the graveyard, particularly in that green-black Graveyard Matters deck. And last up for green, and arguably potentially least, is the Sorcery Speed Rise from the Wreck for 3 mana. It allows you to return up to 1 target creature card, up to 1 target mount card, and up to 1 target vehicle card, as well as up to 1 target creature card with no abilities from your graveyard to your hand. That no abilities clause is just on the last one. Obviously, the regular creature, the mount, and the vehicle can have whatever abilities you want. Now, the cost of 3 mana to potentially return 4 creatures from your graveyard to your hand is pretty awesome. The downside of this, maybe not as obviously, is trying to build a deck that hits all of those boxes. I think the likelihood is you're probably looking at even 1 on a fail case. I think an average of 2, and you've really got to stretch for 3 or 4, particularly outside of limited. So it could be a very upside build around uncommon, or it could be a pipe dream that just never quite comes together. Now, you certainly noticed that I focused almost exclusively on commons for this particular video, and a large portion of that is I will be releasing a Popper Shopper video on Monday, February 10th, not only to give you a leg up on all of those MTGO Popper needs that are coming out in this set, but also to talk about the limited value on those key commons that you're going to want to look for. Before we dive into the budgetary nuts and bolts for this particular set, Ether Drift is bringing one big change, and that is that with Ether Drift's release, it is expected that pre-release codes for Arena being in your pre-release kit should be a thing of the past. That means moving forward, the only way that you can get those free 6 packs on your Arena account is by actually attending a pre-release event at your friendly local game store, and make sure that you're registering for that event with credentials that match up to your Arena account. I think it's the email address that matters, but by all means, check in your own right, because I don't attend that many pre-release events. The other thing that you might need to be aware of is that code that I had on the screen just a minute ago was an honest-to-goodness live code at the time of release. All you have to do is figure out the 2 missing numeric digits and be the first to claim the starter kits from 2023. These are not Ether Drift packs. Do keep in mind that these starter kits will only add cards to your collection that you don't already have. So if you were around on Arena during that 2023 time period when these sets were released, consider leaving this and allowing a newer player to claim it. And of course, to whoever claims it first, please leave a comment, let people know, so other people don't waste their time trying to figure it out. As we transition into the gold, dollar, and cents part of the budget, there's one key factor that we've really got to take into account, and that, of course, is scheduling. Here we are in the year of our Lord 2025, and Wizards of the Coast is releasing 6 standard release premier sets. 3 of which are going to be Universes Beyond, and 3 of which are going to be more contemporary sets. The interesting thing here, or potentially frightening depending upon how you look at it, if we look at the 2023 release budget year, we had 4 sets, the 2024 had 5, and now here we are at 6. Back in 2023, we could very comfortably look at something like uncommon completion numbers that were going to hit in the high 90 percentile. Well, now with 6 sets, we're projecting to be lucky if we hit 75%. So that means we've got 2 real choices. We either need to accept less, which might be perfectly valid, more on that in a moment, or we've got to grind a little bit more and work a little bit harder at the plan. Now, for those that are willing to accept a little bit less, well, that's perfectly valid. I won't fault you for that. In particular, looking at some of the thematics with highly themed sets like Ether Drift and Edge of Eternities, which if you don't know is going to be the space-themed set. And then you've got Universes Beyond, things like Final Fantasy and Spider-Man. It's perfectly reasonable that not every set is going to be for every player. So what you could do is play a little less hard, end up with a little less resources on all 6 sets, or it might be a better choice for you individually to maybe sit out a set or 2 this year if you aren't quite as interested in those themes. Like Spider-Man is not going to be for everybody. I personally am really looking forward to that set. I loved the comic books growing up as a kid. I've loved most of the movies, but to each their own. I won't fault anybody for the decisions that they make. For those that opt to follow the plan and keep their grind right where it is, that means you're going to end up with about an average of 73,000 gold per set. And really that doesn't feel all that different. And with that 73,000 gold available to you each and every season, that's going to allow you to do about 7 jump-ins on average, 2 quick drafts, buy 45 packs of the current set, or ship some of those to the Foundations packs if you're a very new player. It also puts you in a position to buy a gems deal every season, even though they may not offer it, and also allows you to take advantage of a discounted draft token every season, again, if it's offered. For those of you out there opting to take the current season a little bit lighter, there's still a few minimum sort of things that you want to do, just like that daily play, to make sure you are getting the minimum out of each and every set. The first being doing enough jump-in events to make sure that you can build a deck for that only constructed midweek Magic event. That is generally going to be a minimum of 3. You also want to make sure you are doing a draft event each calendar month so that you're getting your rank rewards. For most sets this season, that's going to be 2. So even if you don't buy any packs, you're still going to get 3 to 4 dozen free packs just by participating in that daily play, even if you aren't buying the Mastery Pass. That is going to give you enough commons and uncommons to get a very good feel for the particular set that is going on. We might need to use some of our wild cards earned during this season to fill in some of the more important blanks for future constructed, but that will pan out over time. Additionally, this will also leave you in a position to take advantage of any of those gem daily deals or draft token daily deals, and allow you to push 50,000 gold into the future season. And of course, for those that are interested in finding their own exact path, the budgeting spreadsheet tool that I use for all of these videos is available over on my Patreon. So there it is, guys. That's what's on my radar for Ether Drift from a budget perspective, and what I think deserves to be on your radar. As I'm sure you've noticed, this video was like 4 times longer than my typical video, and I really tried to go above and beyond for video editing for entertainment purposes. So don't spare the likes there. Definitely slam that thumbs up. It would be greatly appreciated. Don't forget to subscribe, because of course there is going to be lots more content coming for the Ether Drift season, from jump-in, limited, budget decks, all the things that we do. And if this video helped you, it will probably help somebody else, so please feel free to share this out on your favorite social media outlets. And before we go, while every member of this community is important to me, I just wanted to take a moment and give a shout out to those patrons providing financial support and keeping the Stronghold from being a complete financial black hole. And of course, let me leave you with some suggestions for your next step here on the channel.